We're going to try to bring together for you a group of people who have had experiences, abductions or encounters, and let each of them talk with you briefly for no more than about 10 minutes. We're going to take a very short break at that time, no more than 10 minutes, and then everybody come back in and ask questions from the audience. So we will have a little break in between the people presenting their own material, and then we'll take all the questions from the audience that we can get in our time allowance. There will be a break, regular break after that. We'll bring out the abduction researcher panel. Again, they will go through no more than 10 minutes of presenting material, background, and so on, and then let the audience ask questions at that point. So I hope you'll all hang around for the question and answer period. And we will bring on our researchers in just a moment, our abductees in just a moment. If you'll hold with me, I'm missing just one, and as soon as I round him up, we'll be ready to go. All right, now that we've got the technical difficulties out of the way and everybody's here, I'm going to let each of our members of the panel tell you who they are and about their experiences themselves. And we've taken a vote among the panelists, and they voted for Leah to begin because, after all, she's the least nervous. She's already been up here today. So after Leah... Right. After Leah, hand it to the gentleman on your left, and then we'll pass it down to the lady on your right, and just keep on going from there. So, Leah, time's on.
We're on now?
Right.
Can you hear? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm not going to talk very long because I spent an hour and a half talking earlier today, so I'm just going to say a few brief things. Mainly, my name is Leah Haley. I'm from Mississippi. I've had abduction encounters throughout my entire life, but I didn't remember them really until 1990. I've been abducted by various types of creatures, I call them. Different people have different names for them. I also have been abducted by military and or government people. I know there's a debate among investigators as to whether these things are really people or not. They're people. I was there. I know they're people. A lot of people have trouble buying that, but that's what happened. Mainly what I'm going to say right now is a result of questions that I've been receiving all day. One question that I've encountered is, why did I lose my job? In relation to this phenomenon, I was teaching in an accounting course at the Air Force Base. Those who heard me earlier know that I encountered some problems with the Air Force. After I was, another thing I didn't mention earlier, because I had a time problem, I had to leave out some things I originally had intended to say, so I'll make up a few of them right now. One thing that I didn't emphasize earlier today because of the time was the fact that when the Air Force officer invited me out to the Air Force Base to see the space shuttle, he insisted that I bring my camera so I could take some real good close-up pictures of the shuttle. He kept telling me over and over again, be sure to bring your camera. He also insisted that I not tell anybody, not even my husband, that I was invited to come out. This invitation was extended to me alone. Well, after that, I refused to teach another accounting course on base. I said, there is no way I will ever voluntarily step foot on an Air Force base again. And that's when I lost my job. My boss said, why won't you teach at the base anymore? And I made the mistake of telling her. And she wouldn't budge and I wouldn't budge. So I didn't quit. I said, I won't quit, but I won't teach on base either. So I was fired. Another thing that I wanted to point out was that, you saw the circular marks on my back and a mark on Buddy Crumley's arm and on Bill's hand. And I mentioned that Bill couldn't undergo hypnosis. He had real good reasons not to undergo hypnosis, and that John Carpenter did a regression on me concerning my marks, and I had no memory whatsoever, none of how those marks got there. Buddy Crumley recently had a regression done on him too, and he remembered struggling, but he did not remember who or what he was struggling with. There was no memory whatsoever of who or what did it. We're at a loss there. I know George Wingfield mentioned last night that there were several others who had an identical mark. Well, when we started investigating, we discovered that the only marks that we confirmed were similar marks, not identical. We've only been able to confirm the three of us as having that same exact mark. So we request that if any of you investigators, abductees, other members of the audience, if you have seen or had a mark exactly like ours and know how it got there, please let us know. We want to know who put those marks or what put those marks on us. None of us have any idea. It's a mystery that we would really like solved. We're not interested in knowing about similar marks now. You know, I've had similar marks and I know how they got there. It's the exact marks that we're interested in. And I'm going to allow you the use of the rest of my time for questions.
Go ahead.
Questions are later, Vince.
All right. Hi, I'm Vince. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Sorry, I got asked to come up here. I'm pretty reluctant, first of all. I'm sweating beyond belief. I've never been hypnotized, and nor am I am not going to be hypnotized. I'll tell you that right now. I'm perfectly comfortable with my array of images from my early childhood. I do not need to explore the parts that I don't remember, period. I have no inclination to do that. It's been around since I've been a kid. From everything from that bald guy from when I was real little, who seemed to be, when I was real little, it seemed to be so tall by my bed, to flying down the stairs a little later on and trying to tell my mother the next morning, watch me fly. And she laughed. And I went outside. She said, do it, go outside. So I went outside and I tried, and of course I wasn't able to fly. A major sighting when we were 15, me and my mother used to deliver a large newspaper out, and when I was 15, coming up over the 48th Street Bridge in Pompano Beach, Florida, because that's where I grew up, in Fort Lauderdale and Boca Raton, we seen this disc come straight out of the sky, almost instantly, from an incredibly bright star to right over us. It was not 20 feet above the car, in the middle of the city, and we watched it go right down I-95 afterwards, because we were right on top of the bridge that goes over I-95. And then this time in Alabama, when I was coming home from the 90 MUFON symposium, and it was, I know this is going to sound unbelievable, it was morning of Friday the 13th, okay? And I'm in the middle of nowhere, I mean nowhere, on Alabama 82 or 81, I forget the name of the number of the road, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'd watched this light follow me for several hours, and I'm like, this ain't right. So I got out of the car and I took a picture of it. And just as I took a picture, just as the flash went off, I didn't know anything about photography at the time, and just as the flash went off, this light started moving towards me, so, oh God, what's this? I jumped in the car, I'd never shut it off, and I took off like a banshee, and about 90 miles an hour, just as this thing was closing in on me, this car come around the corner and shot off like a rocket. A bunch of stuff like that. My most recent missing time, and this is the one that convinced me, and it's the only reason I'm up here really. This is the one that convinced me that something might be going on. About 6 or 7 months ago, maybe a little longer, a little shorter, I'm not exactly sure, but I got home from work and I beat the rain. And I was dry. And I was sitting in the house, and it was 7:45, and I wanted to say, I was watching TV, watch to see what's coming on. And I look up against the wall, and there's this very square, I'd say about 2-foot square, incredibly intense, halogen bright is the term I like to use, bright light. And the next thing I know, it's about 11:30. I can't remember if it was Leno or Letterman or Arsenio Hall, but one of the shows was on, and I was soaking wet. The front door was wide open. Jean and my stepdaughter they were out in Forsyth. They were spending the night with Grandma, her mother, and Stacy's grandmother. And next thing I know, I'm laying face first in the bed, soaking wet from head to toe. The door is wide open, and the dog is long gone. Long gone. Up until that point, it was fanciful things. Oh, well, maybe coincidence here, coincidence there. But to me, that is the one event, and that, I'm the kind of guy, I don't believe a lot of things. And you're going to sell me so easily on stuff. And that, to me, is the one real, I call it a real-time event where I can consciously, without any hypnosis, consciously remember a time, then there's no time, and then I'm awake. That's a real-time event for me. And if it happened to you, it'd be a real-time event for you. And I hope I'm not the only guy abductee up here. Well, that's it for me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vince.
Fine, huh? My heart is pounding. Can you hear it? I hope I can get through this because my lips are sticking together. My name is Debbie Jordan. Used to be Debbie Tomia until June, and now it's Debbie Jordan. But most people know me as Kathy Davis in Bud Hopkins' book Intruder. The reason I'm up here is because a lot of things have been happening since 1983 that are different than what happened in 1983. It's not as physical as it was. I haven't had anything happen since then quite like that. It seems like it's changing, and I'm changing. It's fascinating and frightening, and I want to know if other people like me are feeling it too. I've been having a lot more encounters with little white balls of light in my house and anywhere I go. I had people witness it down in Florida. I've developed an ability to feel magnets, which makes no sense. I know it sounds crazy. I've started to dream in 3D and in color. And I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like I'm getting smarter. So I tried something. I knew that when I was in school, in junior high, they'd given me the IQ test that they give all the other kids, and I got a decent score, good enough score that they called my parents in to tell them that I was goofing off too much because I could do better. Yeah, and my parents are here. But anyway, it was like between, I think, I read it, and I think it was 118, 120, which is okay. After I started to dream in 3D, I call them my virtual reality dreams because that's the only thing I can think of that would most closely describe what I'm doing. I decided to take a test to get into this group called Mensa. And I did really well. I got in the top 1%. Well, it seems to me like with a score of 118 when you're 14 and then 20 years later, to be able to do that isn't the norm. I'm not sure, but the only reason I did it was because I felt different and I wanted to see if there was anything that would back that up. I started talking to my friends who are like me. I don't like the word abductee. Doesn't feel right. I don't know what, I call them like me. And I found out that if I promised not to tell anybody, they were feeling the same way, but they were also feeling the same way I was, and that they didn't know whether they should say something or not because it sounded even more crazy than all the other stuff we've been telling these guys for a while. I've always said that I still refer to a lot of my stuff as dreams because it's still safe. And I'm not too good at this. Well, anyway, my mind is blank. I didn't know I was going to have to say anything. I didn't know I was going to be here till last night. So I didn't have anything thought up in my head other than I just want to know if, will people like me please come and tell me, and let's go tell these researcher guys that something's happening, and let's look into it some more because I think it means something. It's about all I have to say, so I guess I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Debbie.
Hi. I hope you can hear me. My voice is really kind of faint. I don't have a strong voice. My name's Lynn, and I wanted to tell you something that had happened to me with the UFO problem we've all been having up here. I wrote a lot so that I could kind of follow my notes and not stutter. No. 4 years ago, I went on a retreat in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was around fall, so it was getting cold. I was at a main lodge with many of my friends when I decided to go to a cabin that was about 35 yards away from the lodge. I walked out and was just admiring the sky and how beautiful it was, and I remember saying something to myself, something like, if you're out there, I really want to see you. So I heard the leaves kind of roll across the ground and a breeze blow by me. And on my right there was a hill. And immediately I was enveloped in some kind of tubular field. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Two creatures floated towards me, and I felt greeted by them and invited to go with them. And they spoke telepathy with me. They never talked. I floated with them to what appeared to be an old broken-down shack. And as I got closer to the shack, it looked more holographic, transparent to me. I could see a disc-shaped ship inside the image of the shack, and I was led inside the craft where I could see, where I was introduced, sort of, you might want to say, to human aliens on my left. And sometimes I can't remember if there were two or three. I get confused. Human aliens standing there. They motioned to me with their heads, sort of for me to turn around, and they were introducing me, sort of like, to a taller creature. He was a very, very tall alien, and he was standing with his back to me. And it seemed like I floated directly in front of him, and this tall, robed alien rotated around and looked straight at me. The cloak was really unusual because it really wasn't made out of a material that I could tell. It looked like an energy poured into a form, like water into a glass. It was just fascinating. And his eyes were just unbelievable, just unbelievable. I looked into this one's eyes, and it seemed to me that he could see every part of who I was and what I was about. And I knew him and he knew me. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt spiritually exposed, and I knew that he was spiritually exposed too. So what I would call that in my own interpretation was something like a mind meld. That's the only way I can explain it. This alien seemed to smile at me, but but he didn't smile physically with his face. I felt some type of approval from him, and then all of a sudden my body then began to just shake, just like every atom in my whole presence was just shaking and shaking so fast and faster. And then all of a sudden my whole body seemed to explode in a silent explosion. And I remember looking at my arm and seeing light emanate from my body. What I thought was my body, it had transformed into something else. And then I remember looking back up at his eyes, and I remember him drawing me into his eyes. My whole essence went clear into his eyes, into another universe, into another plane. And I can't remember how long I was there. All I remember is like floating around in free space, like I was in total freedom. Time didn't exist there at all, period. And the exhilarance was incredible, just incredible. I remember that he took me to a place that seemed like a desert, what I would call a desert, where he talked to me about particular things and taught me certain things. And let's see. The next thing I remember is I remember going into the lodge to pick up my coat. And I came back to the lodge, and everybody asked me where I had been, because as I was leaving, they were planning to play a record for me. So they were observing me leave because they had already planned to do something for me and waiting for me to get back. And I could recall a little bit of what had happened to me, but I couldn't quite recall it all. And they kept asking me, well, where did you go? And I said, well, I just went to the cabin to get my coat. And they said, well, you couldn't have, because we sent 2 people to get you. And there's no turnoff. It's just a straight walk. And it should have only taken me 10 to 15 minutes. But I didn't say too much. And then I got home, and 2 days later, it just like bombarded me, a lot of the memory of what had happened. And I wrote a letter to the retreat and told them what had happened to me. I didn't expect any response from them. And I went on the search trying to find people who understood alien intervention with spiritual approach, and it was very difficult to find. I didn't think anybody would believe this. Yeah, how could an alien? I thought aliens would come down and have a gun strapped to their waist and say, take me to your leader, and little shark guys, on, but it wasn't quite what I expected. So my experiences are ongoing. They happen pretty frequently. My family has had experiences now, and now that I think about it, I remember all kinds of experiences when I was a child. They used to visit me, and we used to play with spheres, and I remember holding them, and we would just move them around with our mind. And I remember them leaving me at one point in time when I was a child, and how upsetting it was. It was almost parental that my parents were leaving me, or some sort of thing. And I remember getting quite upset about it. And I didn't have any experiences for a long time since they had left me when I was a child, and then as an adult they started happening again. So that's my story.
Thank you, Lynn.
Hi, I'm Jean Robinson. I've had a lifetime of abductions, and too much to go into the 10 minutes I have. I mainly want to talk about what's been happening recently. We all talked about this big happening of '92, which seemed to be a washout since there was no grand sightings and stuff. But to me, something very unusual started in '92. It seems like I'm experiencing a wider sense of consciousness. It seems somewhere in between the physical state and the dream state. And it's like I'm tuned in to a lot of information. I'm getting a lot of stuff just pouring into my head. I used to receive the telepathic messages, and I got spooked about this time last year because some little incident made me feel like, besides the information I was writing down, I was also getting subliminal messages. And to me it felt like I was being programmed to not trust the government. And it didn't match what I was writing down, so I didn't understand it, so I decided I wasn't going to do this anymore. And it was at that point that I realized I really couldn't shut it off. It was the same area I was getting this information from. So it's kind of a constant thing. And recently, I feel like there's an influence in my life, both positive and negative. I'm not in any shape to really process it all. I don't know who to trust. I don't know, you have good aliens and bad aliens, good government and bad government. And at some point we all say we have this thing we have to do and not know what. Well, I had my first one of those was one day about 6 weeks ago. I said, well, I need to write the president. And I said, no, I better not do that. And I started, for about a week, I revised this letter over and over and made sure it was what I wanted to say, because I felt like the timing of this was not of my doing, but the content of the letter was. So I put everything into that letter. And a week passed, and I went over and over, all the possible consequences of what might happen. But it was like a finger poking me in the back. You got to mail this now, you got to mail this now. So I took it to the post office, and I felt like I was, walking to the gallows. Do I really want to do this? No. So, I shoved it in the slot, and kind of an interesting, eerie aspect of it was the day I mailed the letter was the day the World Trade Center blew up. And that night, or the day after, I'm not sure which, was the day Koresh did his Custer's Last Stand thing in Waco. And I'll always feel like, I felt connected in a way to those incidents, and it spooked me. But this letter, in a way, it felt like my last best cry for help, because there is things going on constantly. And I appreciate all the researchers, and everything they're doing, but what's happening to me now seems to be moving a lot faster than anybody can keep up with. And like, I was in the military, and you do this swearing in thing, and I believed in what I was doing, and I don't feel, I feel like I needed to, a lot of people have been harassed by the government, and I have never really, had anything to judge one way or another. In a way, I'm like, I want not a confrontation, but an acknowledgement, because to me it appalls. You have the general public laughing at us like we're, making it all up. The government either ignores us or says it's a mass hallucination, this and that. But it seems to me that even if it is a mass hallucination, whatever it is, that you'd think somebody would be interested enough to do a study on it, because there's thousands of us out here. And it's pretty much seriously affecting my family, my children. It's hard to, go to work and pretend like nothing's happening. I can't hardly do that anymore. And, I just want to know why, if the government knows anything that could help us, that, I know how they do, they have, military has a need-to-know basis. Well, I need to know, and I need to know anything about, what's happening to me, because, there's definitely something happening. And that's basically what I have to say.
Thank you, Jean.
Hi, I'm Lynn. I live in a small town in Arkansas. And I hope you'll forgive me. I knew that I was going to be scared to death, and I wrote the whole thing. So I'm just going to read it. My conscious knowledge of personal involvement with the abduction phenomenon began only 1 year ago. The event that led to the discovery of a bizarre reality in my life occurred over 20 years ago. Due to the unusual nature of the occurrence, I sought assistance last year and was referred to an eminently qualified professional hypnotherapist. And at this time, I would like to say that is John Carpenter, and I'm very grateful to him. After an exchange of pertinent information, it was determined that enough symptomology existed to warrant hypnosis to recover some possible blocked memories. I fully expected and I desired a mundane answer to my questions. Intellectually, I'd entertained the notion that alien life could exist somewhere out there, but I had never thought about it on a visceral level, and I had not thought about what it would mean to me on a personal level. 21 years ago, on a warm, sunny day, a family member and I had attended to some business in a large city in central Arkansas. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we left the city to begin the trip home, a trip of approximately 3 hours. We were both relaxed and in a pleasant mood. After 2 hours of driving time, we approached a small town. A road crew was doing some blasting on the highway that day and signaled the traffic in our lane to stop. We were the lead car, and there were 3 or 4 other cars behind us. After clearing the road, the crew allowed us to continue, and we slowly approached our turn at the junction of an intersecting highway. We both recalled seeing the turn, and then everything went blank. After an interval of grogginess, we suddenly found ourselves on an unfamiliar paved road with no road signs or other indicators of our location. The road appeared new and unused. Both of us were extremely agitated and began looking for a turnaround, hoping we would find familiar territory by turning back. We finally found a very small area that allowed us to turn the car in the opposite direction. After several minutes, we entered the town from the wrong direction, but we had not driven through the town to get there. We finally made our turn onto the intersecting highway and continued the drive toward home, extremely puzzled about what had just happened to us. The area was very rural, and the road was lined with large trees. Both of us felt a sense of unease and a desire to get home as soon as possible. After we drove a short distance, I glanced out the left-hand window and saw a silver object in the sky that seemed to be pacing us. I pointed it out to my family member who was driving. Neither of us could determine any identifying marks and heard no sound, although our windows were rolled down. We both wanted it to be an airplane, even though it had no wings or tail. I watched the craft for several minutes, and it continued pacing us, sometimes briefly hidden from view behind the large trees. Eventually, I looked away from the object, and when I looked again, it had disappeared. When we arrived home, we realized that we had lost about an hour of time somewhere during the trip. We told other family members of the strange occurrence and even returned to the town shortly afterward, specifically to try to locate the peculiar road we'd been on that day. The missing time plagued us off and on over the intervening years, and finally, after 20 years, I could no longer stand not knowing what had happened to us. I began a concerted effort to locate someone who could help us break through the amnesia of that day. Under separate, independent hypnosis sessions, my family member and I explored the events that had occurred during the hour of missing time. With no knowledge of what the other had recovered under hypnosis, our memories indicated substantive corroboration of an abduction by beings that were anything but human. Both of us recalled reaching the turn in the road and having a tremendous force physically lift our automobile into the air, with us still inside, unable to move. After a short period of time, we found ourselves in a round, seamless room with a domed ceiling. I reported that my family member and I were separated at this point as I was led down a hall. My family member stated seeing me led off down a long hallway by 3 alien beings, one smaller than I and 2 about my height. I was taken into a brightly lit room where a physical examination and other medical procedures were performed. My family member was shown several rooms during this time, as if receiving a tour of the craft. Finally, after a period of time, I was taken into another room where I rejoined my family member. We were released shortly afterward and re-entered our car, apparently having been placed on the wrong side of town. We turned on the engine and drove off, soon realizing that we were in unfamiliar territory. From that point on, our conscious memories had taken over. My questions had been answered, and the events of that lost hour were no longer missing. Several of my family members and I have explored many other shared and individual encounters in the past year, both consciously remembered and through the use of hypnosis. Invariably, the shared encounters have contained corroborative information. These encounters have occurred during both day and night. In my family, at least, the abduction phenomenon appears to be intergenerational and ongoing. It has shattered my complacency and belief in a small world view and has forced me to see things in a more cosmic frame of reference. And that ultimately is why I'm sitting here before you today. From the reaction of my family, friends, co-workers, and myself, I know that the urge to deny the abduction phenomenon is very strong. But ladies and gentlemen, it is real. In the final analysis, the only defense we have against the unknown is knowledge. And it's in the hopes of gaining that knowledge that I accept future encounters, for knowledge will not be gained through denial. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Excellent. Thank you. I think you can see that everybody's experiences are varied, and yet there are some unifying feelings that we've all had to go through at one time or another with this experience. If you have questions or comments for our panelists, we're going to take only 10 minutes. We're starting without you if you're not here in 10 minutes, and I'm assuming there'll be a microphone for questions. So you can line up at that point. We're going to let everybody have a little get your nerves back together break, and then we'll have questions. So come right back, or don't leave if you don't want to. All right, we're ready to start questions from the audience. If you have a question for anyone in the panel, there is a microphone at the head of the stage area. Like these women have done, if you have a question, come up and get in line. We're going to take one question each and try to keep them to a specific question so that the people can answer fully a smaller question rather than vaguely a larger question. And if you would direct it to whoever on the panel you would like to ask the question from. All right.
This is for Debbie. It's not really a question. I just wanted to let you know that you're not the only one who's experiencing this acceleration of the genius. Robin Quayle, who's a hypnotherapist from Atlanta, she's regressed over 600 people who've been had UFO-related experiences. And from this group, she's discovered a group that she's called extraterrestrial telepathic intelligence phenomenon, and she's calling them prodigies. And there are many people who are doing exactly what you're doing. They're having some sort of interaction with extraterrestrials, and their IQ is accelerating dramatically. So you're not the only one, and please come back and talk to us. And if anybody else in the audience has had that experience, please come back and talk to us, and we can give you some more information and help you with that. Thanks.
This is for any of you. Do you sometimes get to the point where, like, when you're going to sleep at night, you're afraid to because you know there's something that's going to happen? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I used to do that every night. At one point in my life, I was like staying up half the night and sleeping in the day because it was safe. Everyone else would be awake in the day and I could sleep. I think a little bit, I got tired of being scared. When I started to feel that something was going to happen, I don't know the word, anticipation or anxiety, I just did something else. I called a friend and talked, or I went and found somebody and just talked to them until I got it under control. And then I figured this way, well, if anything did happen, at least I'd sleep through it and that'd be all right. So.
Anyone else on the panel?
To me, sleep is kind of a relief anymore because, you know, it kind of, like Debbie, I'm having these really realistic dreams that some of them are almost like games. They're so clear and like real time, but I don't know, maybe it's my mind sorting out everything it needs to, but I have more anxiety during the waking hours than I do at sleep.
Anyone else?
Okay. What I noticed is that there are subtleties, especially with the animals in the house. That's where I keep my attention focused. Because they're closer in touch with the earth than we are because of our emergence into thought. They notice field changes more easily, if that's the correct grammar. They notice those things quicker than we do, it seems. I could be completely off on that one, but my dog especially, which stays off the beds and stuff, and this dog will just go nuts after what seems to be an encounter of some sort. The dog just totally turns into another animal. The day that he took off out of the house with me, he didn't come back till the next day. He's a little fox terrier, wimpy dog, so.
There was just one period of time where I had trouble falling asleep at night, and that was from July 8, 1990, when I discovered the possibility of having had these encounters, and the first set of hypnosis sessions in March of 1991. It was more the fear of the unknown than anything else. Once I discovered what the creatures really were doing to me and that I was brought back safely and all of that, I was no longer afraid to go to sleep. It was just the period of time between my realization that these things possibly could be real and the hypnosis sessions that I had trouble going to sleep. But I didn't have trouble after I went through regression.
Okay, next question.
For those of you who have children, have they been having experiences, and if so, what do you do to console them?
Yes, Yes. One of my children is definitely having things go on, and it is picked up. It's very traumatic. There's, she's having a hard time too, you know, dealing with it with her everyday life as far as school and things go. The only thing I can do is just be supportive and understanding, and you know, I try to protect her the best I can, but there's nothing I can really do. It's more like cleaning up the emotional aftermath, and you know, I just be as supportive as I can. At least she has someone she can talk to about it, where when I was going through the same things as a child, I didn't.
This stuff, I have 2 boys, and they're big boys. Even though they're just barely teenagers, they're huge. But they've had stuff, they've seen things, and they had their own experiences since they were 2 and 3 and 4 years old. And it scared them. And my youngest one, that's 12, still gets scared by the stuff. The older one seems to be more able to, he's more interested about it now. He wants to know more. The younger one still gets scared by it. And the best thing, only thing I know how to do is try to raise them up the best way I can, give them confidence in themselves. That way, you know, when they get older, at least they won't be like their old lady and worry about they were nuts. They'll believe in themselves, and they know they have people that they can talk to, you know, me and my boyfriend and my mom and dad and everybody about the stuff, so they don't feel like they're alone. And I think that's just about all you can do, really, because you can't be in control of what's happening, but you can be in control of how you deal with it.
Anybody else on the panel?
I have 3 kids. I have a 21-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy, and a 7-year-old girl. And they've all had experiences among themselves. I remember one night when I woke up, I heard my son saying, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And he kept mumbling this over and over again. And I got up and went in his bedroom and put my hand on his arm and said, it's your choice. You don't have to go if you don't want to go. And when he got up in the morning, he didn't remember anything. But I do tell my kids, this is a choice. I don't feel threatened by them. And the one fear I think my kids do have is telling other kids. I always say, keep it to yourself. If somebody says something to you that has heard about my experiences, don't defend me. It's not needed. Just say, oh, well, things happen, and walk away from them. That's my fear, is my kids will be made fun of at school, and instead of saying your mom wears combat boots, your mom goes to space. So that is my fear that I carry with me. I don't like ridicule, and I don't want my kids being made fun of. But I am a realist. I know that it probably will happen at some time. So I try to face it and give them clues on how to handle it.
I have 2 daughters. One's 19 and the other's 16. Before I went to Springfield for my first set of hypnosis sessions, I had to give them some kind of an explanation as to why I was going. I didn't really quite know what to say without telling a lie, because, you know, it seemed so absurd. So what I told them was that my brother and I had seen what we believed to be a spaceship when we were children, and I was going to Springfield to find out if that really was a spaceship or not. My older daughter said, Mom, whatever you find out, I don't ever want to hear about it. And I respected that, and we've not discussed it. She's overheard me talking on the phone from time to time, and she's made it evident by slamming doors and things like that she didn't quite approve of my conversations. And I've had to be deal with that in a real delicate manner and try to respect her need to to not be involved in this. I'm not trying to shove it on anybody. My younger daughter wanted to know everything that I found out, and I tried to kind of sugarcoat things, and she just wouldn't allow that. She wanted to know specifics, details, etc. I've always been a firm believer in when a child asks you a question, you know, if they're ready to ask it, they're ready for the answer. And so if she comes to me and asks me a question, I answer it the best that I can. I'm not certain that either of them has had experiences, but I tend to believe that they both have. My older one, when she was younger, about 2 or 3, 4 years old, wouldn't go out in the backyard. It had a chain link fence on it. She wouldn't go out there by herself because she was afraid of strangers. And I didn't know what that meant, but now I wonder. The younger one has had dreams that she's told me about that seem to closely parallel the ones that I had that turned out to be real encounters. And, you know, she's had dreams of being in a force field that was taking her out of the house, and she was struggling and screaming for me, and I wouldn't respond, she said. And she said that she had a dream in which she and I both were aboard craft, and I was in another room doing she didn't know what, but while I was in the other room, one of these alien creatures that she described as being exactly like the one you saw a picture of, and she had not seen my picture either at that point in time, but she told me that this alien was showing her a model of the spacecraft and explaining the propulsion system to her. She's the type of person that would understand that kind of thing. So I don't make an effort to discuss this with her, but if she comes to me and feels the need to discuss it, then I will. I've tried to present it all in as much a positive light as possible to minimize her fear.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes. Okay. Well, right. This lady will be next. Okay.
I'd like to say that I've had experiences since I was very young, but I was lucky enough that my parents had friends that got me on the right road so I wouldn't feel like you guys feel. I have a positive feeling about it. They told me to make myself look beautiful when I went to bed for the angels that would take me into dreamland. And I was always told that they were angels. Therefore, I thought of them as angels. I thought I was lucky, you know. And I didn't remember my dreams until I got a little bit older and I saw different things. But I never had a negative feeling that I'm getting from everybody that's telling their story. I actually feel sorry for most of you, except the lady in the gold hair in the middle. I feel she's had a wonderful experience, and I feel mine, yeah, I've been on the table and had all those things stuck on me, but they give me a sex dream instead, so it doesn't matter. You can laugh at when you wake up because you don't remember, you don't feel the pain. And as long as they take the pain away from you, they're probably just making you ready for the big change. They were going to go from the 3rd dimension to the 4th dimension. Our bodies are going to be changing. They're just trying to keep track of us to make sure we're going to be able to handle the change.
Do you have a question?
No, I kind of want to tell everybody that.
I have a comment, though. Well, no, not a rebuttal. I just have a comment. They didn't take my pain away. They did take my pregnancy away. I remember a lot of stuff that was really scary, and it hurt. I don't hold it against anything or anybody. And I feel like I'm in some kind of a twisted way, a better person because of this. I don't see it as all negative. I didn't get any negative or positive feelings from whatever this was. I had more of a sense of, this is something that's got to be done, and we're doing it. But it was not an intentional thing for you to be injured, but I'm not going to make you, you know, perfect either. And so I like to think I took a bad situation and made the best of it. And but you know, maybe it was a different kind of, my guy was a different kind of guy than your guy. I don't know. I wish I'd have got sex dreams. That'd have been the closest I'd ever gotten for most of my life.
I'd like to say something to that. One thing that is real prevalent in all of this abductee thing is whether it's good or bad. And that was one thing that came up real early in my situation. And it was something that is very hurtful. It's not something I think that all of us need to be very, very nice and kind to each other, because we're all in it together. And the experiences that we have are very subjective. Each one of us, the same thing could be happening to every one of us, but we take with it our own baggage. And you cannot say that any person is wrong for feeling that it was negative or wrong for feeling that it was good, because I do feel that it is very subjective. And I think it's a hard enough situation that we just need to be good to each other. Don't add to the situation, we already have an alien problem, don't make a human problem.
And I wanted to add that, of course, I didn't have enough time to get into everything this morning, but I've encountered a variety of what I call creatures. And the majority of my encounters have been extremely positive, but I have had a few that were negative, and I'm sorry, but I just don't see how you can interpret a reptilian rape as something positive. And, yeah, I've just had both, and when somebody asks me that question, I'll tell them honestly that some of them have been positive, some of them have been negative. I'm not so sure that this is subjectiveness on my part. I feel like that they were really positive in some instances and really negative in others. I try to deal with it the best that I can and try to help my daughters with it the best that I can, but we can't, I don't believe, categorize them all as, all good or all bad. I think that it's important that we realize that we have both. I wish that I could say that we all up here experienced only positive encounters and that they were all supposed to help us grow, but unfortunately that's not the case with me.
Only thing I got to say about it is, I think Linda Howe put it best a year or a year and a half ago. The difference between cultures between here in South America, and we're all in the same continent, we're in the same hemisphere, is vast. Between here, let's say in Costa Rica or Brazil, between us and the natives in the rainforest, it's a vast contrast between us and them. And I think, as I said again, and I think as Linda said it best, is that they are alien to us. Their way of looking at their codes, morals, and ethics are alien to us, and we are alien to them. And I may be totally wrong in this, but a rape or whatever to them may be just scientific procedure in every way, shape, or form, and to us it's a total violation of our ethics, laws, criminal, non-criminal, whatever. But the thing here, I think, to keep in mind is that they are alien to us and our way of thinking. And that's important to remember when they perform these procedures on you.
I think I'm...
I used to be like you. I felt very positive about this, but over the last year or so, it's like things have changed. The negative part of it has been mostly I attribute to the reptilians. I can't twist it into a positive experience. I've been, told that I should think more positively about it. That maybe I'm going through early menopause, anything like that other than the real thing, but I don't feel like I'm totally negative about the negative experiences, because what I have gained is an appreciation for humanity as it is, and I think humanity's most valuable resource is free will, and I don't appreciate being forced to do something I really don't want to do.
Thank you. One more response? Okay.
I think that we can't deny the fact that there are destructive people in the world with different motives. And although my experiences have been very positive, I have been really lucky, I feel. And I wouldn't say that it's because I'm better than anybody else or more enlightened than anybody else. I really can't give you specifics of why mine were only positive. But the aliens have different motives. They have different personalities, and people have different personalities. And I have never seen a reptilious type thing, so I couldn't say what would happen to me. So they do have different motives, and I think there's room for it all. All I can do is speak for my experiences, but it doesn't deny the fact that there are destructive motives out there.
Thank you. And do you want one more thing? All right.
Thing, please. Yes. One more. I may not have another opportunity to say this, but I just wanted to thank all of you researchers, investigators, directors of organizations, whoever you are, whatever it is that you're doing to help us. I think on behalf of all abductees, I can say that we really sincerely appreciate all the time, all the money that you're devoting to help us out, and we really do appreciate it.
Ditto.
I know that we could sit here, and I would love to. I have lots of questions for our panelists the rest of the evening, and I'm hoping to persuade those of you who are willing to come back after the abduction researcher panel and be available for more questions from the audience. We're going to take is it 10-minute break, Lou? And then our abduction researchers will come up and present a brief presentation and take questions, and then we're going to try to get all of these people back up here for more questions. So see you in a few minutes.
I'm Cheyenne Turner, and I'm going to be the moderator for the researchers involved with the abductions. And I would like to explain just a little bit of how I got involved with some of this field. I was president of a group in Dallas, the MUFON Metroplex, for about 4 years. And I would get many, many calls from abductees who were in a great deal of pain, didn't know who to go to, and just needed someone, to hear their story. And that's how I originally met Karla. And I remember when she and her husband were sitting in my living room giving me their story, and obviously in a great deal of distress. And I helped them find someone to go to do the hypnosis and regressions. And I know that the researchers really give a great deal of their time and effort, and I think they're really to be commended, because it takes a lot of understanding, and I think that we all owe them a great deal of thanks. what they're going to be doing is introducing themselves, giving a little bit of their background and what their research involves. So we will start on this end with Forrest Crawford.
I made Linda sit in the middle so she'd get all the attention too. I talked a lot about symbol stuff earlier, so you know that I like controversial correlations or correlations in general. But what may not have been evident is that I'm very involved in abduction research as well, and have a training as a hypnotherapist, extensive background in ufology, so to speak. I've been doing it for a long time. That's kind of what I bring to the abduction research phenomenon, and have worked with abductees essentially in the St. Louis area, but all over the country as well. And a lot of the information that I present comes from their experiences. In fact, almost all of it does, except for when I tell you it's something weird that happened to me. And it comes from their experiences and the correlations that come out of that work and the communications in there. So I rely heavily on my relationship with the abduction and contact experiencers, if you will, that I work with, because they're the ones that are bringing the pieces together. We're just kind of helping them realize that. That's kind of the way I feel.
Well, it was the animal mutilations that led me to human abductions. The two, I think, are related in relationship to the phenomenon's intrusion on the planet. And I've never been actively involved in terms of the therapy side or the hypnosis side, but what happened is that because I was doing programs that were relating to the subject matter, I began to be a lightning rod for people sending me audio cassettes and letters, and at this point it seems like hundreds of drawings, because they wanted to be able to share something with someone that they felt that they could at least, I guess, whether it was anonymously or giving me their name and their number, sharing experiences. And now, over time, it seems that what has been valuable from my point of view in research is that totally apart from hypnosis, I have been seeing these patterns that are emerging from dozens and dozens and dozens of people from all over the United States. Some are also coming from South America, and I'm seeing the same drawings from people who don't know each other and live on two different coasts. And I hope that there is some value in contributing these patterns in this evolving alien taxonomy that I am trying to continue to gather, because it may be that there might be screen memories, as some people suggest, and that the menagerie might be something that's testing us. On the other hand, Occam's razor would suggest that if you go for the simplest possible answer or reason for why there is this pattern of similar descriptions, it's because there are actually different, whatever they are, involved in various people's lives. And that is an area of research that, that provokes me in this huge phenomenon that includes many facets, as we've been discussing the last 2 days.
My name is John Carpenter, and I have the position in the Mutual UFO Network of Director of Abduction Research. I was just thinking here, it's real interesting. 5 years ago, I came as a naive listener and was learning from people like Linda about what all was going on. And today it felt more like a family reunion. I knew everybody up here that spoke today. They all knew me, and I knew so many people out there in the audience. So this is becoming less of a conference and more of a reunion every year. Anyway, I got into all of this because I volunteered, and I thought it would be interesting if one day I might get to sit in on one case, and it kind of went the other way. I have a lot of people that sit in on my sessions, which are now probably several hundred. I work in Springfield as a licensed clinical social worker and had training in hypnosis. And it's been a real interesting journey. Like everyone has said today, we don't know where all it's going, but I'm in it now for the ride, and I'm fascinated with everything that comes up. And part of my position now is to try to get other mental health professionals helping, and helping in the right way, because there's obviously, as you've heard here today, a real need, and we don't want just anybody, you know, trying to take this on and providing the help, because it's a special kind of help, as you've heard from the, as I will call them, participants in this odyssey that were up here a few minutes ago. They need a special kind of understanding. This is such a unique and bizarre phenomenon, and you just can't go in a 50-minute hour with some psychologist and expect to unravel it all. And it just requires, you know, many hours. Last weekend when I was with John in Atlanta and David Jacobs, and we were talking about even what Bud Hopkins does, and we all spend like 3 to 4 hours each time we meet with somebody, because it just requires that much support and just effort, and the hypnosis, just to go carefully and do everything right. And so it's real important that other professionals just don't jump in thinking, oh, this is something new and interesting, and I'll just fit it into my little schedule. It doesn't work that way. So I think that as we've been doing the conferences, it came out of the Roper report, in taking roughly 100 mental health professionals at a time around the country and really trying to give them the best information, the best ideas of how to help. Ironically, I think a lot of those professionals that show up are showing up because they've already had experiences. They've told us that a lot of times. So, you know, the numbers in the Roper poll are probably exactly right, and as we were saying, perhaps very conservative numbers. So obviously there's a need out there, and I find myself really trying to help. I get calls from California and Minnesota and Florida all in one night, which is hard when my 4-year-old is tugging on my leg and wanting me to go play a game with him. So it's been a real challenge, but there's no way I'm going to quit. There's no way I'm going to stop. It has to be seen through all the way wherever we're going, and so I'm in it.
Yeah, I'm John Mack. I won't burden you with another speech. I guess what I cannot resist saying is how profoundly entering this field changes everything in your life, personal, professional, your energy systems. And one of the things I want to mention, John talked about the fact that you need to set aside 3 or 4 hours. Well, there's a big economic aspect of this. Most psychiatrists are set up, or other mental health professionals, to do 1 hour. The reimbursement structure only reimburses for 1 hour. And people just can't afford this. And I think one of the things this is forcing us to do is to examine the rather rigid structure of the mental health professions with regard to therapy and treatment. If you were to do a 45-minute hypnosis session or a whole session, you've only left 50 minutes, is a little bit like a surgeon who goes in to do a resection of a piece of the bowel and gets it out, and looks at his watch and says, well, it's 50 minutes, there's no time for sewing up here, we'll just leave the person with the abdomen open and leave. I mean, it is pointed out the way in which our profession is structured, not according to human need, but according to the convenience of the therapist, and I think that has to be looked at differently. The other thing that it's changed for me is the whole notion that there is such a thing as an expert who knows something, and then there's this person who has this problem. That's all changing. Working with abductees is totally non-hierarchical. They know something, and if I can help facilitate that knowledge and learn from that and be of use, then that's what happens. But that's not the model of the old doctor-patient hierarchical model. So it's forcing me to totally re-examine the whole model of how I do treatment and therapy, not just in this area, but how our profession is structured. So I think this work has the possibility of radically showing us ways of reforming and restructuring how we do support, counseling, therapy, whatever you want to call it, in the mental health professions.
Well, before I say anything, I'd like to say that it's wonderful to have an end to the old patient-doctor hierarchy. I think I can speak for many patients out there. So thank you. I'm Karla Turner. I think I may be the only one on this stage who came into this research because of the experiences my family and I were going through. And like Cheyenne said, we did get to someone who gave us extremely valuable help when we needed it. And I also want to say thank you to the folks who are trying to educate our mental health professionals, because I did turn to those in the community where we lived. Every single one of them, none of them would work with us. It was something that they would be laughed out of the profession for doing. And I hope that you can reach all of these people, and I want to give you a specific name and address to include on your next list. This being the case where we were, and for a lot of people where you are, we had to turn to each other, to other people in this predicament for help, and found some excellent help. I will not say we had to settle for it. I think we were lucky to get it. But in the course of working through what my family and I had been through, I developed an association with the researcher working with us and became as much of an assistant as I could in her research, and have continued to do that to this day. I am not the primary hypnotist, believe me, but I make sure the people who want regression, who ask for regression, do have someone that they can go to that I trust with my life and with my children. I wouldn't recommend anyone that I didn't have very good recommendations from people they had already worked with, and I think that's important for any of you to know about. Secondly, it being a backdoor researcher and a front door abductee, I'm in a very different position from a lot of the researchers, because I have a very personal stake in how the research goes. And therefore, perhaps some of my feelings are going to be a little bit different than the others that you will have heard or will hear. I do find that I can sit outside as the abductee and look at the researchers as you guys and say, why are you guys doing this or doing that? And why aren't you doing this or doing that? And then on the other hand, other abductees or experiencers who come to us put me in the position of the researcher trying to make sense. They want some answers, some solutions, some explanations, and I'm back on the other side of the fence here, so I can sympathize from both ways. And I can tell you, in my opinion, on both sides of the fence, the researchers need to get their acts together a little bit better on some things. There is too much jealousy. There is too much hoarding of information. And while researchers fight over these things, abductees go on going through these experiences not getting anywhere. So I think we've got to have to clean the whole act up a bit. Secondly, on the side of whether, which we've heard raised here the past 2 days, the question of good aliens, good experiences, bad experiences, good abductees, bad abductees, and it's come to that in many cases. From the research that the researcher I work with is Barbara Barthlick, from the research of well into the hundreds of cases, approximately 500, including those that I have worked with and have brought research and investigative material into the fund from, we see that you cannot say, if you're going to be true to the data, you cannot say that a person's experiences when they have an encounter reflect that person's inner being, that person's moral strength or lack of it, that person's spiritual evolution or lack of it, because as Leah pointed out, the same person can have a positive experience one time and a negative one the next time, and this is the same person. So there is an objective reality that is different in some experiences from others, no matter who's experiencing them. And if I had to stake anything right now, which is a bad thing to do, to put money on the table on any answers to these questions right now, the things I would feel strongest on putting money on are that there are a variety of alien types. Although we have many cases where 2 or more types are involved in a person's abduction as if they're working together, we don't know what that means, but we know that some of the experiences are so intrinsically different that there seem to be many agendas, not just one. So you can't put a good label or bad label on the entirety when you have diverse things that are not in the same pot. I think the one thing the research shows is that there are many things going on that don't fit the patterns that are nice, neat patterns. If you look at just what one group is doing, you're going to get some patterns. If you pull in what's happening to everybody, you're going to get some things that won't fit in any category or any pattern. So looking for neat answers, I think, is a limiting way to approach it from what the people we've worked with have experienced. And trying to put everything into one pot is defeating, because you're not going to get everything in there without chopping off somebody's arms or legs or other experience that doesn't fit the mold. Other than that, I'm open for questions with the rest of them.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to open the floor for questions. If you'd like to come up to the microphone and present your question. And do try to make them as brief as possible.
I guess this will be for anybody. A lot of the speakers have said something about the environmental damage that we're doing to the planet and how the aliens feel about that. And I'd like to get some more feedback on that. Thank you.
It's not that the aliens, always tell them consciously, you need to clean this up or do this. It's interesting. It seems like there's an effect that definitely takes place. So many people have had these experiences are so much more in tune with nature. Jean, who you heard up here, Jean Robinson, when I was working with her, soon after some of her first recollections that she was having these experiences, she saw a turtle crossing the road, and she was just kind of watching it and marveling at it, and with new eyes, so to speak, with new eyes. And here came a car down the road, and instead of swerving to miss it, it swerved to hit the turtle, and it just tore her up that had happened. And she'd never reacted that way before. And with so many people who've been through this experience, there is such a keen phenomenon that happens that tune them into nature. I don't know where exactly it comes from, whether it's like directly told to them or it's just part of the experience or what, but there is definitely a phenomenon there. So it's hard to answer in terms of whether they're told anything specifically to do. There's just an awareness that occurs.
One thing that I've noticed is that there will be a little bit like the time release capsules. 2 weeks ago, within a 4-hour period at night, I had a phone call from 4 different abductees. And each one of them, there was one in Oregon, there was one in New Jersey, there was one in Pennsylvania, I think the other one was in Maryland. Each one was just calling independently to say, Linda, last night, I had, the only way I could describe it was a virtual reality dream. And Debbie, the Kathy Davis character, Debbie Tomey, in Illinois, she was also, I talked with her about that time. Well, I had not heard the term from an abductee about having a virtual reality dream before, a couple of weeks ago. In one night, 4 people calling me. And the way that they were explaining it, one woman said, it's like I'm inside of a Nintendo game, 3-dimensional in color. Only the content and the subject matter of what they were describing all had to do with earthquakes, volcanoes, and high winds. The first time that I had heard about the high wind dreams was in 1989. Then there were more people in 1990 who were saying they were having dreams, not vivid dreams, or not this 3-dimensional color feeling, but they were having dreams about seeing the planet being swept with increasingly higher winds, worse storms. The volcanoes have always been there, and the earthquakes. Well, over this evolution of the years, when you suddenly would get on a night or 2 nights this pattern of abductees calling from all over the country, I began to wonder about this release of information and these changes. There have been lots of arguments about whether the so-called screens that abductees have been presented about seeing the Earth going through some kind of huge cataclysm, was this a test or is this something being shown in the future? regardless of what is the truth or not the truth, there is a fact that abductees around the country at certain times seem to get releases in dreams or vivid dreams, or now they're saying virtual reality dreams, as if it's taking on a whole new character right now, just suddenly. And every time that there is this new agitation among the abductees that I know and stay in touch with me, there always seems to be the common denominator has to do with something having to do with the planet Earth. Where this is going to head and lead, I don't know, but something seems to work at some subconscious level or other level on many people at once.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what John was saying also, that many of the experiencers develop sensitivities to a multitude of different kinds of energies and natural phenomenon as well because of their experience, which goes along with what John was saying about their attunement to the planet becomes very sharp. They can sense earthquakes coming days to weeks sometimes in advance. They can feel shifts in weather or other conditions in advance, or they can tell when things are slightly awry. And their attunement to the workings and patterns of nature seems to be heightened in some way. We've even tested some of these energy abilities, at least in a rudimentary sense, and shows that they can easily detect extreme magnetic fields and changes in those, or another phenomenon that deals with stress in materials called tensor fields, that can also be tested, and there's more work needs to be done in this area to really quantify it scientifically. But early indications are that they become very sensitive to different kinds of energies and are affected emotionally by changes that are going on to the Earth, and this may contribute to this growing concern that they have that the planet is about to tip on its side and everything's going to go crazy. So it's kind of hard to tell if they're just really feeling more in tune with things, or if these predictions that we keep hearing are really have some substance.
Anyone else have a comment on the panel? Is that it? Any other questions from the audience? This might be a short evening. Okay.
I'm interested in the state of mind or state of consciousness, or maybe you should say altered state of consciousness, immediately prior to, during, and immediately after an abduction experience. Linda may have touched on an aspect of it with the dreams. And maybe I should be asking this to the abductees themselves. And if you can answer the question, I wish you would, if the panelists can't. The accounts that I have read, when I read them, I get the idea or the impression of a dream state, or at least my dream states. And the particular curious thing is, which is like my dream states, I don't think the ridiculous things in my dreams are ridiculous until I wake up and think about them with my conscious mind. And I get this from, that this is possibly the case, seems to be the case in the abduction experience. And I would just like for someone to talk about that some, either you all or the actual.
Yeah, I'd like to start it and then see who wants to jump in. In the West, we have a very limited number of words for different states of consciousness. In Eastern thinking and religion, there may be 50, 80, 100 words for the different possible states. We have conscious, unconscious, dream, sleep. And we have hypnagogic states, which means the state when you're falling asleep, and hypnopompic when you're waking up, and that sort of in-between state. And that's about it. I guess you can have stupor if you're, We really are very limited in what we know. Now, this phenomenon forces us to think about subtleties, and we don't like to think about subtleties. So, high percentage of people will remember until they've had a chance to explore their abductions as dreams. Okay. Now, when they call it a dream, is it a dream that recollects an abduction? Is it an abduction they're calling a dream? There's all kinds of ways the word dream is used. It was just an experience that happens at night. You call it a dream because that's the way you were raised to think. What I mentioned this afternoon, and I want to stress it, if you take an abduction experiencer through the night of an experience, there is that moment of truth when they realize they weren't really asleep when this happened. There's a sort of like, you went to bed, and it's very important to go, reconstruct the events of the night. Like, okay, what time did you go to bed? You're watching television, and you went to bed, and then what happened? And then this light came in. Now, but you didn't say you fell asleep, and that's a moment of truth. And at that moment, a shift in consciousness occurs. It's not as if they're just like an ordinary waking consciousness. One of the people that Bud and I have worked with in New York describes it's as if the aliens come through a screen. They break through, it's like a scrim, which is the screen in the theater. It's as if they shatter one reality and come into this reality. The person is not asleep, but they're in another state of consciousness, but they're fully present in that state of consciousness, but it's a different state of consciousness. So it's a true experience, but in another state of consciousness. And we don't have language for that. So that's just a starter. But this is a very important and very interesting subject, a very good question.
Clark, I'd like to say something, having had the experience and also having worked with and listened to many, many other people with the experience. In one instance, when I had a daytime encounter, I was in an altered state before I knew I was having an encounter. It was almost technologically precise. I was walking from a neighbor's yard to my yard, and when I stepped, I was perfectly fine on this side of the line. I took a step over an invisible barrier, which immediately put me into an altered state before I even saw the ETs. So I felt it was very much an imposed, external, technologically produced state of mind, so that when I looked up and saw the little beings there in the yard, I didn't freak. I did not act as I would have normally. My normal state of consciousness was very much dampened, and there was surprise. There wasn't shock and fainting. The same thing seems to happen with other people. No matter, there's a change in how you normally would react, and I think it's imposed in some very external technological way. For instance, one abductee who was very upset about things that had happened with him and had said, the next time I get my little hands around their little necks, I'm going to smash them in the face. I'm really mad about this. They're not going to do me this way anymore. And he had a house guest staying at his house, and when the house guest was asleep in the living room on the sofa, the host woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason and looked down the hallway and saw the little blue light probe that had been in his house several times before during experiences or before the onset of one. He saw this bobbing over the head of the person who was sleeping in his living room on the couch, and he had just said, not 3 days before, if I ever see him again, I'm going to give him this. He looked up and said, oh, I know what that is, out to sleep. The next morning was doubly furious. He had been thwarted in what he would have normally and naturally wished to do. So it seems like there's an imposed state, not perhaps dream state at all. It's just something that dampens our normal response, and that's how it feels, really. And it's in the daytime. You know you're not sleeping when you're walking and talking and driving and cooking and so on. So it's not like the dream state feels.
Anyone else on the panel for that one? Okay, next.
I'd like to ask our esteemed panel of broad experience here a question perhaps you can't answer completely, but give us some contributions from your experience to compare and contrast the information we're putting together on abductions, meaning forced by not giving you free will, however you want to call that, versus the contact voluntarily where there's no force. What are we learning from these two? Are we getting similar data, conflicting data? And how is it coming about? Can you contrast and show the conflictions and contrast on this?
to start to answer that question, I think it's important to know who comes to us. People who are coping, people who maybe remember things consciously or feel they are contactees may never come to us for any kind of help. So it's kind of skewed in terms of the population that we may see. We see the people who are confused, anxious, sleepless, irritable, all those more traumatic responses. And so they may see themselves more as abducted and terrorized or something like that, at least to start with. So I think that was an important distinction in terms of comparison. I would like to talk to a lot of people who perhaps call themselves as contactees and have maybe more positive experiences just for that comparison, but I think so much of what I do see comes because it comes to the label of trauma, at least initially. I do want to add that through my research that I would say about 50% end up feeling positive about it and about 50% don't, even though at first they may have come for that indeed initial traumatic release that they need to work through.
Well, one of the things that I know in letters and audio cassettes people have sent me, that probably the second emotion after fear is anger, and that there is a pattern in the people who feel that their will has been violated, that they've been raped, or there's a kind of a syndrome there. I think it's also interesting that there are several men that have corresponded and I have interviewed and talked with who you were talking about will and versus violation or will, or those who felt like that they had consciously acquiesced to do something versus those who felt that they had no choice. Well, there is a couple of interesting twilight areas here that seems to involve both. And in men, one of these patterns that I've heard over and over again is where they feel in the beginning that they're having a sexual encounter with a pretty blonde woman or something. And they are happy and willfully involved in this action. And then you will hear them, it's one or two versions I've heard. They suddenly, the blonde woman who they thought they were in a sexual relationship with is suddenly replaced by either a gray that's floating above them because they feel no physical pressure, and or they suddenly see clearly whether the phenomenon releases this or there's something that the human mind and spirit forces through this wall. They see the tubes and the machines that are hooked up to their genitals. At that moment, they feel complete and total humiliation and rage. Now, I've seen that pattern, and one man just 3 nights ago who has had this happen to him several times, he called because he's been going through a ebb and flow, a vacillation between I am finally getting ready to deal with them on a conscious level. I am going to break through this strange state. And he called the other night to tell me that he was waked up and he knew he was totally conscious and that there was a golf ball size glowing white light in the bedroom which he saw move what he estimated to be about 5 feet through the air. But he said that he was struck with a terror that was as deep and abiding as anything he'd ever experienced before. Well, just a week or so before, he had said, I am ready for conscious encounter. Now, there's something about these golf ball size, baseball size, softball size lights for, I'm sure, all of us here and those of you out there. It is prevalent throughout the abduction literature and the experiences. And I've wondered, are they some kind of an advanced TV, telephone communication system? It's come in place to make some kind of communication. And yet, I know more abductees are so terrified of these glowing light balls, and the few that have relaxed into a place eventually after they've come and gone, they get some kind of communication from them. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to this issue of saying they want an experience, the phenomenon seems to come back with something that would seem to be now up front, center, and conscious. but we all still seem to have a great deal of difficulty even dealing with a ball of light.
I would like to say about the contact and abduction division that for the working purpose, I think you'd need to define what those things are. And an abduction is where someone is taken forcibly or against their will, and a contact is where you have an exchange of information where nobody is forced to do anything. It's easy to say the two things are not alike, and the same things can happen within one person's experience. Now, there are those who do think they have gone willingly once the intrusion is started, but if you remember how artificially and technologically easy it is for these people to change our moods and change our minds and change our even our sensory input from pain to pleasure, from fear to love, instantaneously, then we don't really know when we go by ourselves if we're going willingly or if we're going because we've been made to feel we're going willingly. So I tend to say if they don't take you anywhere under any conditions, you've had a contact. If they've taken you anywhere, you've had an abduction. Because a contact is simply a talk, an exchange.
Is that it? Another question?
Concerning government involvement or military involvement in abductions, does this not take place when the person is sort of coming out of the closet and starting to talk about it or get therapy or something? When does this happen?
Some people doesn't think it happens at all, or don't think it happens at all. In one case, it happened before the person even knew there was anything and certainly hadn't come out of the closet. In another case, it had happened before anyone except the immediate family knew, so there was no coming out of the closet. I don't think it has anything to do with trying to keep you from talking, because for a lot of us, it really pushes you to talk.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, too. Obviously, Leah, who you heard today, is actually, I think, the only case that I've had that there was that kind of involvement. There have been some indications in other cases, very interesting, where the person who didn't know much about the phenomenon would say, I think something happened last night. And the other thing that's strange is that these black helicopters were roaring through the valley this morning. We've never seen those before. I wonder why they're circling our house. And they hadn't even explored the experience, but, it gave me the feeling sometimes that there was some kind of surveillance. Certainly when we know that satellites can read newspapers from space, that some of these objects just might be tracked somehow, and they might know where they're going.
In Maryland, there have been several of us involved with the investigation of a case of a woman who last June was waked up with a pulsing blue light coming through the shades in the bedroom. It's a very small house. I've been in this house. And for some reason that's still not clear, she never opened up the shades. She did go to the doorway to see in the living room, and she could also see the light pulsing there, but she never made any aggressive action to go out of the house or anything. But the next morning, there was a 14-foot diameter circle in the front yard, which we did get soil samples from. We were able to find that there were some very strange biochemical changes actually in the seed and the grass. And she began to have helicopters of, we think, military nature, over the house on such a regular basis that a MUFON investigator went with a camcorder, videotaped this. There were other researchers who would be on the telephone with her, and all of a sudden they couldn't even talk on the phone because the sound in the house was so loud. One day, feeling like she was going out of her skin, she said, I'm going to forget all this. I'm going to lie down on a chair in the backyard in the sun. I'm going to make this all go away. And she was lying, feeling relaxed for the first time in a while in the sun, and she said it was like somebody leaned over her and the shadow came across her face and her head. And she opened up her eyes expecting to see her husband leaning over her. And she said approximately 10 feet above her was a helicopter. And the helicopter, she said, was all beige. And she said she couldn't see through the windows. And she was going on in these minute details about this helicopter. And I said, well, the sound must have been horrific. And she said, well, there wasn't any sound. And I said, well, things must have been blowing. This is 10 feet above you. She said, no, it was very still. Well, that is not a helicopter, as I understand helicopters in terrestrial terms, interacting with air molecules. So, again, we've got this camouflage, I don't know what it is, where this thing was, she thought, a military helicopter. Well, interestingly enough, one of the investigators in Maryland began doing some research through a congressman. And they were able to push this case actually to some agencies, and they got back a response that there was a classified national security reason for why helicopters were in that neighborhood, and they would not define it. And that's as of a couple of months ago. But we don't know what more. She still has helicopters over the house. But I think there's an example of hearing and seeing real helicopters, and then what was this thing 10 feet above her on the back porch?
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just make a brief comment about this. It's a hard question to answer because it seems to be very complex. You'll have one witness over here who's having experiences with grays, never saw a government person or helicopter their entire life of experiences. Another person that seems to be involved with a group exactly like this other woman is harassed continuously by helicopters, government people. Sometimes they're even abducted, maybe by the government, and interrogated or examined to see what the aliens were up to, maybe, who knows. And then you have other cases like what Bill talked about, where the government and the aliens seem to be working together. What the hell does this all mean? You know, I mean, we have 3 different groups with 3 different motives, and they just happen to look alike? You know, maybe. And when does the government get involved? Are they understaffed? Maybe they just can't handle all the abductees. You know, I don't know. But it seems like all those kind of scenarios may be going on.
Okay. Next question.
You pointed out that it takes a lot of commitment and sensitivity for a therapist to work with these people. How are you going to determine who's got the qualifications?
I won't determine that. The abductee will determine that. They will know who feels right to them. The person may have all the credentials in the world. They can be a total jerk. And I know quite a few. No names. And then there's some who have very little training, but their heart's in the right place. They have intelligence, maturity. They have enough skills to do the right thing. And I applaud them. So I get so many calls asking for who to refer, and you try to find who might be out there, and then I don't know who that person is, and I tell them, I says, look, this person says they're interested. You check them out. You let me know if it's a bad experience. It says, I can't guarantee. It says, you have to determine that.
I think that...
No, it's not.
No? I think that the work requires some kind of a new field, that there might be mental health professionals that would be qualified to be in it, but I would not like to see it restricted to mental health professionals. First of all, we've got more to unlearn than the people that are natural to this field. Now, I think the question that should be asked is, what are the natural gifts that people need to enter this field? I'm working with an assistant in Boston, Pam Casey, who has had no mental health training at all. She's not an abductee, and yet she's an absolute natural, and working with people, knows what to say when, is open, can hold affect. I think one of the qualities is the capacity to be there with a person who's undergoing extraordinarily powerful affect about a matter which is not explainable. And mental health professionals are it's very important. I think a lot of people go into my field because they want to be able to explain the things that have troubled them in their lives. And this is to be with mystery that is so powerful and that challenges our reality, at the same time the sensitivity, that John and you are talking about, I think it requires that we perhaps invent a new field which will have mental health professionals, but will have some other folks too, and then to develop training programs that are specific to this kind and related work.
Does this one not work? Well, just one thing is that one of the things I have found is that people need somebody to listen to them without feeling any judgment, and that I have just held more men and women who just began to sob, and there's nothing more I can do than just hold them. And yet that in itself seems to be a kind of catharsis, and I've experienced that many times. And there's probably a word here that compassion is the area, and we are dealing with something that is so unknown and unpredictable, but that is one thing every one of us can give each other, is more compassion and less criticism and judgment. And if you have somebody who is trying to tell you an experience that just sounds like it is completely over the top to you at your subtitle level, just listen. Just listen. And listen to them, let them talk it all the way out. Some nights when I feel like I am so exhausted and I want to lie down, and you get the phone call and you know it's going to be an hour at least, but somehow everybody keeps going through this kind of together. And I think that's really another important part of this, in addition to what the professionals have to be able to provide too.
Yeah, you can't teach people compassion. There's no certification for that. That's something the person working with the researcher will know, or the investigator will know. There's also a great deal of intuition involved in this, and again, you can't learn it. I think there are some born people to work with this, and there are some people that all the training in the world would not make competent to do so.
It certainly takes dedication. Next.
After you get past the if this is happening questions or how this is happening questions, it just kind of leaves one question left. Why is it happening? Out of all your research and everything, what's your best guess? Why is this happening?
I want an answer from everyone.
Next. Oh, that's the big one. Geez. We would probably all give you a different answer on that. I mean, there's so many possibilities, and you probably heard the different theories. I really don't like to speculate. I mean, when people ask that question, I will list maybe 5 different theories, like, you know, it's to save us, it's to save them, it's to save the planet, it's none of that, it's scientific research, it's like what we do with wildlife, on and on and on. And there's no one thing that sticks out in my mind. In fact, more recently, it seems like maybe it's more spiritual related. Maybe it's some evolution of consciousness, and like in 2001, the monolith appears, and then all of a sudden everybody's doing new and neat different things. It's like maybe it's something like that. I don't know, and it gets tricky getting into all the speculation. So I guess I'll pass.
None of us want to deal with this question, because sometimes I feel like I'm in one of those rooms, you know, the dances where they have all the mirrors, the faceted mirrors, and the lights go around, and depending upon which wall you look at, and it moves, and it moves, and it moves. That's the way this whole phenomenon feels. And that means the multiple facets that go beyond the human abduction. It involves the mutilations, the crop circles, the whole area of what used to be called parapsychology, ESP, mental telepathy. All of it seems in some way or another to have some relationship here. But if I had, I guess, one honest gut reaction to all of this, I really do believe that there is something in conflict about us. And I think that there are forces that are ebbing and flowing, of which, and around us, a lot of the time we seem to be unconscious of the ebbing and the flowing of these forces upon us. Jacques Vallée calls it a control system. I've tended to use simply the word another intelligence. I don't think it's just one. I really do feel that at least two somethings are in conflict, and whether or not all of the old literature and biblical perspectives of the light and the dark, whatever words you want to put on it, are involved, something along those lines, I think, is inherent to the nature of what we are dealing with, and that it is forcing us to deal with things we don't want to deal with because of the complexities of the ebb and flow of the forces, and that's as close as I can get.
As different as some of these experiences are, that I talked about earlier, other various groups having various agendas, I think that it's undoubtedly true that there is at least one group that harvests from us something, maybe more than one thing. We have something they want, and they come and get it. There is seems to be another group that tries to elevate, impart, educate, teach, and teach us in some way how to maybe resist this other thing. And I think that's the sense of conflict that comes across again and again and again. We have something one group wants, and they don't care how they get it, they get it. Another force, I won't even say group, because sometimes they are only information and not actually there, seems to be trying to help us find a way to be strong enough or evolved enough or in some way resisted enough to take charge of and take control of these things that are taking from us. And sometimes I think maybe we're the good ETs, the ones who are trying to do this. Maybe we did come down here and incarnate to do this sort of battle. It comes across from many abductees. That's exactly how they feel. And you begin to see that's not altogether a crazy possibility. And yet there is a group that does very much disregard anything about us spiritually. There's something at the heart of this involving our souls. Maybe they don't have them.
Before we continue with the questions, we are going to end this at 11 officially, and any of you that do want to stick around and ask more questions of the researchers can do so, but anyone, you're free to leave at 11, and that includes anyone on the panel. Some would like to get some sleep tonight, I think. So now I think several people wanted to reply to the question that was on the floor. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. A teenage girl said to her grandmother, who said something that was disturbing to her in a publicly embarrassing way, "Grandma, you missed an extraordinary opportunity to keep your mouth shut." And I'm not taking that advice, unfortunately. Just one quick thought about that ultimate question. We tend to think of us and them, but one way to think, one might think about it, is that there's some kind of a coming together that is a relationship, and that the intelligence that's bringing us together is not ours or theirs, that the motivational structure is in some higher level or whatever, and that they get something from it, maybe some kind of embodiment, some sort of biological evolution, and we get something which is some opening of our consciousness, some kind of return to the sacred, and that the whole thing is orchestrated not at our level. And that, maybe I'm just getting a little dotty because it's late at night here, but I really wonder if there isn't another consciousness, some kind of divine consciousness that may be at work here, and isn't us or them, but that we are in a program not of our own making. I mean, that's the ultimate loss of control.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to actually attempt to answer the question. It's my personal opinion, of course, but starting from where John just left off, this lofty place is where I'd like to start, as opposed to why this abductee or that or this contactee, why the whole thing, why the interaction going on. Touching on this concept is that imagine humanity walking along the ground and coming to this fence, and we climb up on the fence, and I mean all of humanity. We climb up on the fence, and for some reason we liked it up there. And instead of just sitting on the fence, we've built a grand tree house up there, and we've really entrenched ourselves on the top of this fence. And maybe the reason that all of these things are happening is because somebody's saying, you're not supposed to be sitting on the fence, please get off. And we're going, no, we like it up here. We like it up here. So some of the people went, some of humanity said, okay, I'll get off, and we jumped off and went on. And some of the people said, no, we're staying, we like the fence. Okay, so then enter the not-so-nice influence that says, get off the fence, and smacks you off of there. Both types of getting off the fence are valid. The point is, get off the fence and get moving. Get your consciousness going again and broaden yourself and understand what is really going on. And you can have some nasty lizard aliens drag you on board and do all kinds of rude things to you, and it might help get you off the fence. Or you can say, okay, I'll get down and go on my way. Whatever the reasoning is, maybe the whole thing is telling us to get on about our way. And I think that 20 years ago it was really easy to be a ufologist compared to what it is now, because back then the phenomenon was over there. It flew around, it landed once in a while, and we got excited about that. Abduction phenomenon was something that was like pretty bizarre in those days. Now it is very personal. The UFO phenomenon is, we are all personally involved in one way or another directly with this phenomenon. We have never been able to get information directly from the source before like we do now, meaning abductees, contactees, and the researchers are right there in the middle of it as well. So it is something that we're all involved in, and we can't separate ourselves from it completely ever.